The rain turned to ice on Calder Wynne's face as he spotted the overturned wagon through the downpour, and the girl crumpled beside it, her screams swallowed by thunder. He should have kept riding. In the Colorado Territory of 1878, stopping for strangers meant trouble, and trouble meant dying. But when he saw the blood pooling beneath her father's body and heard her broken sobs cutting through the storm, something ancient and undeniable seized his chest. Some choices, he'd learn, aren't really choices at all. Stay with us until the very end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had teeth. Calder Wynne felt them biting through his oilskin duster as his horse, Ash, picked a cautious path across the muddy plains. Lightning cracked the sky open like an axe splitting wood, illuminating the endless Colorado grasslands in stark white flashes that burned after images into his retinas. Thunder followed so close it rattled his bones. He'd been riding since dawn, pushing hard to reach the line shack before the worst of it hit. 15 miles still separated him from shelter, and every one of those miles was turning meaner by the minute. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour. Rain that had started as a nuisance was now a biblical deluge, driving sideways with enough force to sting exposed skin. Calder pulled his hat lower and hunched deeper into his saddle. At 32, he'd survived enough prairie storms to know this one was different. This one wanted blood. Ash nickered nervously, ears flicking back. The gelding had been with Calder for 7 years, long enough to trust the horse's instincts better than his own sometimes. When Ash balked, pulling hard to the left, Calder gave him his head. That's when he saw it. Through the sheets of rain, barely visible in the fading light, a dark shape materialized off the trail. At first, Calder thought it was just a rock formation or a dead tree. But lightning flashed again, and the truth hit him like a fist to the gut. A wagon. Overturned. One wheel spinning slowly in the wind, and beside it, a figure hunched on the ground. Every survival instinct Calder had cultivated over 15 years on the frontier screamed at him to keep moving. Broken wagons meant broken people, and broken people meant complications. Could be a trap, could be disease, could be any of 1,000 varieties of trouble that would get a man killed if he wasn't careful. The figure moved. A spasm of motion that looked wrong, desperate. Damn it! Calder touched his heels to Ash's flanks and turned toward the wreckage. As they approached, details emerged from the chaos of the storm. The wagon was a small prairie schooner, the kind used by families making the crossing from the east. Its canvas cover had been shredded by wind, flapping like the wings of a dying bird. Supplies littered the ground, a broken chair, scattered clothes, a tin pot rolling in the mud. And there, kneeling in the muck beside the wagon's rear axle, was a young woman. She was sobbing, deep, wrenching sounds that somehow carried over the roar of the storm. Her dark hair hung in soaked ropes around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and her hands were covered in blood. Calder's right hand dropped to the Colt revolver at his hip as he swung down from the saddle. "Ma'am?" he called out, voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another person in 3 days. She didn't hear him, didn't even look up, just kept sobbing and clutching at something Calder couldn't quite see through the rain. He moved closer, boots squelching in the mud. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" This time she heard. Her head snapped up, eyes wide and wild with terror. She scrambled backward, nearly falling over herself in her haste to get away from him. "Stay back!" Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Please, just leave us alone!" Calder stopped, raising both hands slowly. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." He pitched his voice low and steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "Name's Calder Wynne. I'm a ranch hand out of Cross Ridge, about 20 miles west. I saw your wagon and thought, 'They already took everything,'" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "There's nothing left. Just go." Lightning flashed again, and in that moment of stark illumination, Calder saw what she'd been kneeling over. A man. Middle-aged, gray-bearded, lying face up in the mud. His chest was soaked with blood, too much blood. His eyes stared unseeing at the storm-torn sky. Dead. Recently, from the look of it. Calder's jaw tightened. He took another careful step forward, keeping his hands visible. "Ma'am, I can see you've had trouble. But you can't stay out here. This storm's getting worse, and nightfall's coming. You'll freeze to death before morning." "I'm not leaving him." She turned back to the body, gathering the dead man's head into her lap with a tenderness that made Calder's chest ache. "I won't leave my father out here alone. I won't." Her father, Christ. Calder looked around quickly, assessing. The wagon was destroyed beyond any hope of shelter. No tent, no supplies that weren't ruined or scattered. And those words she'd said, they already took everything, clicked into place with ugly certainty. Raiders, or outlaws. Someone had hit this wagon hard. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer for a long moment, just sat in the mud, cradling her father's head, rocking slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, scraped raw by grief. "3 men. This morning, just after dawn. We were making camp when they rode up." She swallowed hard. "They seemed friendly at first, asked where we were headed, if we needed directions. Papa told them we were going to Denver, that we had family there." A bitter laugh escaped her. That was his mistake. Telling them about family, about the money we were carrying to help us start over. She looked up at Calder, and he saw something terrible in her eyes. Not just grief, but a kind of shattered innocence that couldn't be repaired. "They pulled guns, took everything, our money, our supplies, even Papa's watch. He didn't fight. He just stood there with his hands up, telling them to take it all." "But they killed him anyway," Calder said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, fresh tears cutting tracks through the mud on her face. "The leader, tall man with a scar across his lip, he laughed when Papa begged them to leave us the wagon at least. Said we wouldn't need it where we were going." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then he shot Papa in the chest, just like it was nothing, like Papa was nothing." Calder felt something cold and hard settling in his stomach. He'd seen violence before, plenty of it. The frontier wasn't kind to the weak or the unlucky, but there was a special kind of evil in men who'd kill for pocket change and a few supplies. "The storm hit right after," she continued, speaking almost to herself now. "They rode off south, and the wind came up so fast. The wagon tipped, and I couldn't—" She looked down at her father's face. "I couldn't even bury him. The ground's too hard, and I don't have a shovel, and I just—" Her words dissolved into sobs again, her whole body shaking. Calder stood there for a moment, rain hammering down on his shoulders, and did something he almost never did. He made a decision based on feeling rather than practicality. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up at him through the rain. Mira Hanlon." "Miss Hanlon." Calder crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "I know you don't want to leave your father. I understand that. But he's gone. And you're still here. And staying out in this storm will kill you just as sure as those outlaws would have if they'd had the mind to." He paused. "I have a shelter about 8 miles north. It's not much, just a line shack the ranch uses during roundup, but it's dry and it's got a stove. I can get you there before full dark." "But Papa—" "I'll come back," Calder said. The words came out before he'd fully decided to say them, but once they were in the air, he knew they were true. "Soon as the storm breaks, I'll come back with proper tools, and we'll bury him right. With dignity. You have my word on that." Mira stared at him, searching his face for something. Honesty, maybe, or just the smallest reason to trust. Whatever she found, there must have been enough, because after a long moment, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Calder stood and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "Can you ride?" he asked. I think so." "Good. We'll have to double up on Ash. He can carry us both." Mira looked back down at her father one last time. Calder watched as she bent and gently closed the dead man's eyes, then brushed a kiss across his forehead. "I'll come back for you, Papa," she said softly. "I promise." Then she straightened, squaring her shoulders in a way that told Calder she had more steel in her spine than the situation suggested, and nodded to him. "I'm ready." Calder led her to where Ash stood waiting, reins dangling. The horse eyed them both warily, but didn't protest when Calder swung up into the saddle and then reached down for Mira. She took his hand again, and he pulled her up behind him with practiced ease. She settled against his back, arms wrapping tentatively around his waist. He could feel her shaking, from cold, from shock, from grief, probably all three. Hold tight, he said. And if you need me to stop, you just say so. I won't need you to stop. Her voice was quiet but firm. Just get me away from here. Please. Calder touched his heels to Ash's sides, and they moved out into the storm. The ride to the line shack was brutal. The storm intensified as they traveled north, rain turning to sleet that stung like buckshot. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Several times, Calder had to rely purely on Ash's instincts to keep them on course, trusting the horse to find the path when he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Mira didn't complain. Didn't speak at all, actually. She just held on to him with a grip that gradually weakened as exhaustion and cold took their toll. Calder found himself talking to keep her conscious. Line shack's just over the next rise, he said, pitching his voice to carry over the wind. Built it myself 3 years back. Nothing fancy, but the roof doesn't leak and the stove draws clean. No response. Her head had dropped forward to rest against his shoulder blade. Miss Hanlon? Mira? You still with me? Yes. The word was barely audible. Just tired. I know, almost there. Stay awake just a little longer. He felt her nod against his back. The shack finally appeared through the gloom, a dark, squat shape hunched against the hillside. Relief flooded through Calder's chest. He guided Ash around to the lean-to shelter he'd built on the structure's east side, dismounted, and reached up for Mira. She nearly fell into his arms. Her legs buckled when her feet touched ground, and he had to catch her, supporting her full weight. Easy, he murmured. I've got you. Those words, I've got you, seemed to break something in her. She sagged against him, and he heard her breath hitch in a way that meant tears were coming again, but she fought them back, straightening with visible effort. I can walk, she said. I know you can, but humor me anyway. Before she could protest, Calder bent and scooped her up, carrying her toward the shack's door. She was lighter than he expected, and colder. Her wet clothes had soaked through to his, and he could feel her body heat leaching away. Hypothermia. They were racing against it now. The door wasn't locked. Nothing worth stealing out here. And Calder kicked it open, carrying Mira inside. The interior was dark and musty from disuse, but it was dry and the wind wasn't screaming through it, which made it paradise compared to the hell outside. He set Mira down carefully on the single wooden chair near the cold stove, then turned to the task of getting heat going. He'd left kindling and firewood stacked in the corner on his last visit. Within minutes, he had flames crackling in the stove's belly, orange light beginning to push back the darkness. We need to get you out of those wet clothes, he said, turning back to Mira. She looked up at him with something like alarm. Calder felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the growing fire. He cleared his throat. I've got a spare bedroll and a dry shirt. You can change while I see to Ash, but you have to get dry, Miss Hanlon. Wet clothes will kill you as sure as the storm. Understanding softened her expression. Of course. I'm sorry I wasn't... Nothing to apologize for. He moved to the corner where he kept his emergency supplies and pulled out a faded blue work shirt and a thick wool blanket. These'll swallow you whole, but they're clean and dry. I'll step outside. Thank you. She took the items with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped them. Calder ducked back out into the storm, giving her privacy. He spent the next 15 minutes tending to Ash, rubbing the gelding down, checking his legs for injury, making sure he had access to the feed bag Calder kept stored in the lean-to. The horse had earned his keep tonight, and then some. Good boy, Calder murmured, running a hand down Ash's neck. We'll get you properly brushed come morning. When he judged enough time had passed, he knocked on the shack's door frame. Decent? Yes. He stepped back inside. Mira had changed into his shirt, which did indeed swallow her frame, hanging almost to her knees. She'd wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. Her wet dress hung over the back of the chair, dripping onto the floor. She'd managed to partially dry her hair, and it fell in dark waves around her face. For the first time, Calder got a good look at her. She was younger than he'd initially thought, early 20s maybe, pretty in a quiet way, with delicate features and large dark eyes that held far too much sorrow for someone her age. A purple bruise was forming along her left cheekbone. "Did those men hit you?" he asked, voice harder than he intended. Mira's hand went to her face reflexively. "One of them. When I tried to stop them from taking Papa's watch, it wasn't valuable, just silver plate. But it was his father's, the only thing he had from—" She trailed off. "It doesn't matter now." It mattered. Calder felt anger simmer in his gut. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating kind that was far more dangerous. He filed away the detail. 3 men, one with a scar on his lip, heading south after the robbery. If they were smart, they'd keep riding and never come back north. If they weren't smart— "You should eat something," he said, pushing the dark thoughts aside. "I've got some jerky and hardtack. It's not much, but it'll help." "I'm not hungry." "Doesn't matter. You need food." He pulled the supplies from his saddlebag and handed them over. "Small bites. Your stomach's probably twisted up from the shock." She took the food mechanically and nibbled at the jerky without enthusiasm. Calder busied himself with hanging up his own wet coat and checking the stove, giving her space to process everything that had happened. The shack slowly warmed. The storm raged outside, but inside the firelight created an island of relative peace. After a while, Mira set aside the food and spoke. "Why did you stop?" she asked quietly. Calder looked up from where he was adjusting the damper on the stove. "What?" "Back there. At the wagon. Why did you stop?" She studied him with those dark eyes. "You said you were trying to reach shelter before the storm hit. Stopping for me put you at risk. So why did you do it?" It was a fair question. Calder wished he had a good answer. "Seemed like the right thing to do," he said finally. "Most men wouldn't have." "No, I suppose not." "So why are you different?" Calder leaned back against the wall, considering. "I'm not," he said. "Different, I mean. I've seen enough people die on these planes, some of them because they got unlucky, some because they got stupid, and some because nobody was around to help when they needed it." He met her gaze. "I happened to be around. Simple as that." "It's not simple." Mira pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You risked your life for a stranger. That's—" She paused, searching for words. "That's more than simple." Calder didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind outside. "Tell me about your father," he said eventually. "If you want to." Mira's expression softened with grief and something like gratitude. "His name was Thomas. Thomas Hanlon. He was a school teacher back in Ohio." A faint smile touched her lips. "He loved books more than anything. Always said education was the only thing nobody could take from you." "Sounds like a good man." "He was. After my mother died 5 years ago, it was just the 2 of us. He tried to keep teaching, but the grief—" She shook her head. "It hollowed him out. Last year he decided we needed a fresh start. His brother, my uncle, had settled in Denver, was doing well in mining equipment, wrote Papa letters saying there was opportunity out west for anyone willing to work. So you left Ohio?" 3 weeks ago. We sold everything we had, bought the wagon and supplies, and joined up with a small group heading toward Colorado. Papa was so hopeful." Her voice cracked. "He kept talking about how things would be different, how we'd build a new life. He even joked about maybe finding me a husband out here, some strong frontier type who could appreciate a woman who knew her letters." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but she didn't seem to notice. "We got separated from the main group 4 days ago when our wagon axle cracked. Papa said it would be fine, that we'd catch up once he fixed it. But the repair took longer than expected, and then those men came, and—" She broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth as if she could physically hold back the sobs threatening to escape. Calder moved without thinking, crossing the small space and crouching beside her chair. "You don't have to talk about it," he said gently. "But I do." Mira looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Because if I don't, if I just bury it inside, it'll eat me alive. Papa always said grief demands acknowledgement." She took a shaky breath. "So I'm acknowledging it. My father is dead. He was murdered by men who valued his life less than $30 and a silver plate watch. And I—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. I watched it happen, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I should have fought harder. I should have. You'd be dead too. Calder's words came out sharper than intended. Those men would have killed you without a second thought if you'd given them trouble. You being alive, that's not weakness. That's survival. And right now, survival is what your father would want for you. Mira stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You're right. I know you're right. It doesn't feel right. It won't. Not for a long time. Calder stood, joints creaking. But you'll get through it. One day at a time. How can you be so sure? Because you're still here, still fighting. That takes strength most people don't have. He returned to his spot against the wall. Get some rest, Miss Hanlon. Morning will come soon enough, and there's work to be done. She looked like she wanted to say more, but settled for another nod. Thank you, Mr. Wynne, for everything. Calder, he corrected. Just Calder. Then thank you, Calder. She laid down on the bedroll he'd prepared, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her and her breathing evened out into sleep. Calder sat watching the fire, listening to the storm, and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the world draped in an eerie calm. Calder woke from a restless sleep slumped against the wall to find Mira already awake, staring at the dying embers in the stove. Morning, he said, voice rough. She turned and he saw the signs of a sleepless night written in the dark circles under her eyes. Good morning. Calder stood, working the stiffness out of his back. I need to ride back to the wagon. Keep my promise about burying your father. He paused. You should stay here where it's warm. No. Mira was already on her feet. I'm coming with you. Miss Hanlon, I'm coming, she said firmly. He's my father. I need to be there. Calder recognized the steel in her voice, the same quality he'd glimpsed the night before. Arguing would be pointless. All right, but we need to get you some proper clothes first. That shirt's not going to cut it for riding. It took some creative work with his spare trousers, a belt, and his only other shirt, but eventually they managed to outfit Mira in something approximating frontier wear. She looked half-drowned and wholly exhausted, but she was on her feet and moving, which was more than he'd expected. They rode out into the aftermath of the storm. The plains were transformed, washed clean and sparkling with moisture, every puddle reflecting the slowly brightening sky, beautiful and terrible, like everything out here. They reached the wagon site within an hour. In daylight, it looked worse than Calder remembered. The destruction was complete, not just from the storm, but from the deliberate vandalism of men who'd taken pleasure in breaking things. Thomas Hanlon's body lay where they'd left it, covered in mud, but otherwise untouched. Small mercy. The wolves hadn't found him yet. Calder had brought a shovel from the shack's supplies. He chose a spot on a small rise about 50 yards from the wagon, high enough to have a view, sheltered enough to be peaceful. Good land for a final rest. The ground was soft from the rain, which made the digging easier. Mira knelt nearby, silent and still as stone, watching. It took 2 hours to dig a proper grave, deep enough that animals wouldn't disturb it. When it was ready, Calder gently lifted Thomas Hanlon's body and carried it to the hole, laying him down with as much dignity as circumstances allowed. Do you want to say something? He asked Mira. She nodded and stepped forward, looking down at her father's face one last time. Papa, Her voice caught, started again. You always told me that every ending is really a beginning, that death isn't the end of the story, just the turn of a page. Tears streamed freely down her face. I don't know if I believe that, but I want to. I want to believe you're somewhere better now, somewhere with Mama, somewhere without pain. She knelt and picked up a handful of earth. You were a good father, the best, and I promise, those men won't get away with what they did. Somehow, someday there'll be justice for you. She let the earth fall onto her father's chest, then stood back. Calder began filling in the grave. Neither of them spoke. When it was done, he fashioned a simple cross from pieces of the broken wagon and planted it at the head of the mound. I'll come back with a proper marker, he said. One with his name. Thank you. Mira touched the cross gently. For all of this. For giving him this much, at least. They stood there for a while longer, the morning sun climbing higher, warming the air. Finally, Mira took a deep breath and turned to face Calder. What happens now? She asked. Good question. Calder had been wrestling with that all morning. The smart thing would be to bring her to Maple Creek, see her settled with the local church or Women's Aid Society, then wash his hands of the situation. But when he looked at Mira Hanlon, at her determined eyes and squared shoulders, at the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide, he found he couldn't quite bring himself to do the smart thing. Now, he said, I take you to town, get you set up somewhere safe, then we figure out the rest. The rest? Food, work, a place to live. He held her gaze. A future, if you want one. Something flickered in her expression. Hope, maybe, or just the faintest easing of despair. I don't have any money. Those men took everything. We'll figure it out, Calder heard himself say. You're not alone in this, not anymore. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. Mira studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, then let's go to town. They mounted up, Mira settling behind him on Ash like it was becoming natural. As they rode away from the grave, Calder felt her arms tighten around his waist. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Something that felt almost like trust. He'd stopped in that storm on impulse, driven by instinct he didn't fully understand. Now, riding through the morning light with this grieving girl holding on to him like he was her anchor in a spinning world, Calder began to suspect that impulse might just change the course of his entire life. The cowboy who preferred solitude had found someone to protect, and against all logic, all reason, all his carefully constructed walls, he found he didn't mind. Maple Creek announced itself with smoke rising from chimneys and the distant sound of a hammer striking an anvil. The town sat in a shallow valley where Willow Creek split around a stand of cottonwoods, creating a natural gathering place that had attracted settlers for the past decade. It wasn't much, maybe 40 buildings total, half of them still raw lumber that hadn't weathered enough to blend with the landscape. But after the violence and isolation of the past day, it looked like civilization itself to Mira. Calder felt her shift behind him as they crested the ridge overlooking town. It's not Denver, he said. It's perfect, she replied softly. They rode down Main Street at mid-morning, drawing curious stares from the handful of people moving about their business. Calder nodded to a few familiar faces, but didn't stop until they reached a whitewashed building with a sign that read, Maple Creek General Store and Post Office. He swung down from Ash and helped Mira dismount, his hands steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle after hours in the saddle. Mrs. Chen runs the store, he explained, tying Ash to the hitching post. She's fair, and she doesn't ask too many questions. If anyone in town knows about work for a woman in your situation, it'll be her. The store's interior smelled of coffee, leather, and the earthy scent of potatoes stored in burlap sacks. Behind the counter stood a compact Chinese woman in her 50s, her salt and pepper hair pulled back severely from a face that had seen its share of hardship and come through sharper for it. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and her eyes moved from Calder to Mira with swift assessment. Mr. Wynne, she said, her English carrying only the faintest accent. I haven't seen you in town for 3 weeks. Thought maybe you'd finally gotten yourself killed doing something stupid. Not yet, Mrs. Chen. Calder removed his hat. Though I came close in that storm yesterday. That storm was sent by angry spirits. Mrs. Chen's gaze settled fully on Mira, taking in the borrowed clothes, the exhaustion, the bruise on her cheek. Who is this? This is Miss Mira Hanlon. She's had some trouble on the trail. Her father was killed by outlaws, and she needs a place to land until she can figure out what comes next. Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change, but something softened in her eyes. Outlaws. Always outlaws or Comanche or disease. This land eats people. She came around the counter, moving with surprising grace for someone her age. You look ready to fall over, girl. When did you last eat a real meal? I'm not sure, Mira admitted. 2 days ago, probably, Calder said. Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound in the back of her throat. Come. There's stew in the back room. You'll eat, then we'll talk about work. She glanced at Calder. You too, cowboy. You look like death warming over. The back room served as both storage and living quarters, with crates of goods stacked along one wall and a small table near a pot-bellied stove. Mrs. Chen ladled thick venison stew into 2 bowls and set them down with a firmness that brooked no argument. The first spoonful hit Mira's stomach like a blessing. She hadn't realized how hollow she'd become until real food, hot, savory, substantial, began filling that emptiness. Beside her, Calder ate with the methodical efficiency of a man who viewed meals as fuel rather than pleasure. Mrs. Chen watched them both with arms crossed. So, tell me what happened. Between bites, Mira recounted the story. The separation from their wagon train, her father's attempt to make repairs, the 3 men who'd seemed friendly until they weren't. She kept her voice steady through most of it, only faltering when she described watching her father die. 3 men, Mrs. Chen said when Mira finished, one with a scar on his lip. They headed south, you said? That's what Miss Hanlon told me, Calder confirmed. Harlan gang, Mrs. Chen said with certainty. Dex Harlan and his brothers Cole and Ray. They've been hitting wagons and small homesteads all through this territory for 6 months. Sheriff knows about them, but can't seem to catch them. They're too smart, too mobile. Her eyes hardened, and too willing to kill witnesses. Mira felt ice slide down her spine. But they left me alive. Only because the storm came up, Calder said quietly. If the weather had held, they would have come back. The weight of that truth settled over the table like a shroud. Mira set down her spoon, appetite suddenly gone despite her hunger. Mrs. Chen broke the silence. You can't change what happened, but you can decide what comes next. She looked at Mira directly. Can you read and write? Yes, ma'am. My father was a school teacher. He made sure I had a thorough education. Good. Can you cipher? Keep accounts? I kept the household ledgers back in Ohio. Balanced them every week. Mrs. Chen nodded, something like satisfaction crossing her face. Then I can use you. My eyes aren't what they were, and my son, who usually helps with the bookkeeping, went to California last year chasing gold he'll never find. I need someone who can manage inventory, handle correspondence, deal with customers. She named a wage that seemed impossibly generous to Mira. Room and board included. There's a small space above the store that's been empty since my son left. Mira blinked, hardly daring to believe it. You're offering me a job? Just like that? Just like that. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. I came to this country with nothing but the clothes on my back and my husband's name, which turned out to be worth less than nothing after he died and left me with debts I didn't know existed. I know what it means to need a hand up. She extended that hand across the table. Do we have an agreement, Miss Hanlon? Mira took the offered hand, shaking it firmly. Yes. Yes, we do. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Mrs. Chen stood and began clearing the bowls. You can start tomorrow. Today you rest. Mr. Wynne, show her the room upstairs and make sure she has what she needs to settle in. Calder rose to his feet. Yes, ma'am. The room above the store was small but clean. A single space with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking Main Street. Sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. It's not much, Calder said from the doorway. Mira turned to him, and for the first time since he'd found her in the storm, she smiled. Not a big smile, grief still held too much of her face for that, but a real one, touched with genuine warmth. It's wonderful. It's more than I could have hoped for. Calder felt something shift in his chest at that smile, something he didn't want to examine too closely. You'll need some proper clothes. Women's things. Mrs. Chen can probably help with that, or point you towards someone who can. I'll figure it out. Mira moved to the window, looking down at the street below. Calder, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You saved my life. You gave me a chance to— You don't need to thank me, he interrupted, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. Anyone would have done the same. She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes said she knew that was a lie. No, they wouldn't have. But you did, and I won't forget it. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Calder couldn't name. He cleared his throat and stepped back toward the door. I should head back to Cross Ridge. Boss will be wondering where I've been. Will I see you again? The question came out too quick, too hopeful. Mira's cheeks colored slightly, as if she'd surprised herself by asking. Calder found himself answering before he'd thought it through. I come to town for supplies every couple of weeks. I'll stop by. Make sure you're settling in all right. I'd like that. He nodded, settled his hat on his head, and turned to leave. But at the threshold, something made him pause and look back. Miss Hanlon? Mira? Yes? Your father would be proud of you. The way you're handling this, the strength you're showing, that's all him. Remember that when it gets hard. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she kept her composure. Thank you. I will. Calder descended the stairs and walked out into the bright morning, feeling the weight of Mira's gaze following him through the window. He untied Ash and swung into the saddle, trying to shake the strange reluctance that had settled over him at the thought of leaving her behind. She was safe now. Settled. That's what mattered. So why did it feel like he was leaving something important unfinished? The ride back to Cross Ridge took 4 hours, giving Calder plenty of time to think about things he usually avoided thinking about. By the time the ranch buildings came into view, the main house, the bunkhouse, the barn and corrals, he'd almost convinced himself that what he felt was simple concern for someone who'd been through trauma. Nothing more complicated than that. Tom Breslin, the ranch foreman, was standing in the barn door when Calder rode up. He was a barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. Win, he called out. Where the hell have you been? You were supposed to check the north fence line 2 days ago. Calder dismounted and began unsaddling Ash. Got caught in the storm. Had to shelter at the line shack. For 2 days? Found someone in trouble on the way. Young woman whose father was killed by outlaws. Brought her to Maple Creek so she wouldn't die out there. Breslin's expression shifted from irritation to grudging approval. That storm was a killer. Lost 3 head of cattle to lightning strikes. He paused. This woman, she all right? She will be. Mrs. Chen gave her a job at the store. Good. World's got enough orphans without adding more. Breslin watched Calder brush down Ash with perhaps more attention than the task required. You planning on heading back to check on her? Might, when I'm in town next. Uh-huh. There was amusement in Breslin's voice now. Well, when you do, bring back that new wire we ordered. Should be in by now. Calder shot him a look. I'm not. Whatever you say, son. Breslin clapped him on the shoulder and headed toward the house. Get some rest. We're moving the herd to the south pasture tomorrow, and I'll need every hand. The next 2 weeks fell into the familiar rhythm of ranch work. Calder rode fence lines, helped with the cattle move, repaired a broken windmill, and tried not to think about dark eyes and a smile that had pierced through layers of careful emotional armor he'd spent years building. He mostly failed at that last part. It wasn't like him to fixate on anyone. Calder had learned young that attachment was dangerous. It gave life too many ways to hurt you. His parents had died of cholera when he was 15. The girl he'd thought he loved at 20 had married a banker from St. Louis instead of waiting for a cowboy with no prospects. After that, he'd kept people at arm's length, invested his emotions in horses and open sky instead of human complications. But Mira Hanlon had gotten under his skin somehow. In quiet moments, when he was alone on the range or lying in his bunk at night, he found himself wondering how she was doing, if she was eating enough, if the nightmares were fading or getting worse, if she thought about him at all. Finally, on a Saturday morning, he saddled Ash and told Breslin he was making a supply run to town. About damn time, the foreman said with a knowing smirk. Try not to forget the wire this time. Maple Creek looked much the same as it had 2 weeks earlier, though the mud had dried and the air had warmed considerably. Spring was asserting itself across the territory, bringing green grass and wildflowers to soften the harsh lines of the landscape. Calder tied Ash outside the general store and pushed through the door, the bell chiming his arrival. Mrs. Chen looked up from where she was stacking canned goods on a shelf. Mr. Wynn, right on schedule. Ma'am, I came for the wire order. Of course you did. Her eyes sparkled with something suspiciously like humor. Mira, could you fetch Mr. Wynn's order from the back? A door opened behind the counter, and Mira emerged carrying a coil of wire. She'd changed, not dramatically, but enough for Calder to notice. She wore a simple calico dress that actually fit, and her hair was pinned up in a style that looked both practical and pretty. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow. But more than the physical changes, there was something different in the way she carried herself. A little more confidence, a little less of that crushing grief. Her face lit up when she saw him. Calder, I was hoping you'd come by soon. He felt his mouth go dry in a way that was completely ridiculous for a man of 32. Miss Hanlon, you're looking well. I'm feeling better. She set the wire on the counter. Mrs. Chen has been wonderful, and the work, it helps. Gives me something to focus on besides. She trailed off, but they both knew what she meant. That's good. That's real good. An awkward silence fell. Mrs. Chen glanced between them with barely concealed amusement. Mira, why don't you take your lunch break? Mr. Wynn, I'm sure you could use a meal after your ride. The hotel dining room serves a decent stew on Saturdays. It wasn't subtle, but neither of them argued. They walked to the hotel in silence, hyper-aware of each other in a way that felt both uncomfortable and oddly right. The dining room was half full of locals and a few travelers, but they found a table near the window with a view of the street. Over bowls of beef stew and fresh bread, they talked. At first, the conversation was cautious, circling around safe topics: the weather, the town, the peculiarities of Mrs. Chen's inventory system. But gradually, as the meal progressed, they settled into something more natural. Tell me about the ranch, Mira said. What's it like working out there? Calder considered the question. Honest work. Hard work. You're up before dawn and you fall into bed exhausted every night. But there's something about it, being out on the range with nothing but sky and grass for miles, that feels right. Like you're part of something bigger than yourself. Oh, you love it, Mira observed. I suppose I do. Never thought of it that way, but yeah. He broke off a piece of bread. What about you? You adjusting to Maple Creek? Better than I expected. The people have been kind, for the most part. There's been some gossip, a young woman showing up alone, wearing men's clothes, with a story about murdered fathers and outlaw gangs. Mrs. Chen says to ignore it, that they'll find something new to talk about soon enough. She's right. Frontier towns thrive on gossip, but they get bored quick. Mira smiled. That's what I'm counting on. She paused, her expression growing more serious. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Chen said, about the Harlan gang. Calder's jaw tightened. What about them? She said they've been terrorizing this territory for months, that they've killed other people, that the sheriff can't catch them. Mira's hands tightened around her spoon. I keep wondering if I should try to help somehow. Give descriptions, testify if they're caught. No. The word came out sharper than Calder intended. Mira blinked in surprise. No, he repeated, forcing his voice to soften. Mira, those men are dangerous. If they found out you could identify them, that you survived to tell the tale, they'd come after you, and they wouldn't make the mistake of leaving you alive twice. But if I could help bring them to justice, justice isn't worth your life. Calder leaned forward, holding her gaze. I know you want to see your father avenged. That's natural. But the best thing you can do, the thing that would honor his memory, is to live, to build the life he wanted for you, not to throw yourself into danger chasing revenge. Mira looked away, conflict clear on her face. I just feel so helpless. They're out there somewhere, probably hurting other people, and I'm here eating stew like nothing happened. You're here surviving. That's not nothing. She met his eyes again, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just the recognition of shared pain. Calder knew about wanting revenge, about the way it could eat at you from the inside if you let it. All right, Mira said finally. I'll let it go, for now, at least. Good. They finished their meal in companionable silence, then walked slowly back toward the general store. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and the town bustled with Saturday activity around them. Calder? Mira said as they reached the store. Would you come by again? Next time you're in town? He should say no. Should maintain the distance that was clearly the smart choice. Should protect both of them from whatever was building between them that felt far too fragile and far too important to trust. Instead, he heard himself say, "Yeah, I'll come by." Her smile was worth any risk. Over the next 6 weeks, a pattern developed. Calder found reasons to ride into Maple Creek every week, sometimes twice a week. The supply runs became more frequent. The errands multiplied. Breslin stopped even pretending to believe the excuses, but he didn't say anything beyond the occasional knowing look. Each visit, Calder and Mira would find time to talk. Sometimes it was just a few minutes at the store counter while Mrs. Chen pretended not to eavesdrop. Other times they'd have a meal together, or Calder would walk Mira through town after she finished work, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the early days of the settlement. They learned about each other in layers. Mira told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother who died too young, and her father's quiet grief that had shaped her whole adolescence, about the books she loved and the dreams she'd had of maybe teaching someday, following in her father's footsteps. Calder, less comfortable with sharing, found himself opening up in ways that surprised him. He told her about his parents, about the loneliness of growing up orphaned in a boarding house in Kansas, about the first time he'd worked cattle and felt like he'd found his place in the world, about the way the frontier could be both brutal and beautiful, and how once it got into your blood, you couldn't imagine living anywhere else. They didn't talk about feelings, didn't acknowledge what was growing between them. It was easier that way, safer. But it was there in every conversation, every shared smile, every moment their hands accidentally brushed when he helped her down from a wagon or passed her a package at the store. The town noticed. Of course they did. Small towns always noticed. "That cowboy from Cross Ridge has been coming around an awful lot," one of the church ladies mentioned to Mrs. Chen within Mira's hearing. "Mr. Wynne is a good customer," Mrs. Chen replied coolly. "And a good man. Miss Hanlon could do far worse." That night, lying in her small room above the store, Mira allowed herself to think about what Mrs. Chen had implied. Could do far worse. As if there was something to do at all. As if what she and Calder had was more than just friendship born from trauma. But it was more, wasn't it? She felt it every time she saw him riding into town, every time his serious expression softened into something almost like tenderness when he looked at her. Felt it in the way her heart jumped when the store bell chimed and she looked up, hoping it would be him. She was falling for him. Had probably been falling since that first night in the line shack when he'd promised to come back for her father and had actually kept his word. The question was, did he feel the same? And even if he did, what future was there for a grieving shop girl and a cowboy who seemed determined to keep the world at arm's length? Mira didn't have answers, but she found herself hoping that time would provide them. Calder, meanwhile, was fighting a losing battle with his own carefully constructed emotional walls. Every time he saw Mira, he felt another brick crumble. Every conversation, every shared moment, every time she laughed at something he said, it all chipped away at the defenses he'd spent years building. He tried to logic his way out of it, told himself he was just checking on her welfare, making sure she was safe and settled, told himself the visits would taper off naturally once he was satisfied she was all right. But the visits didn't taper off. If anything, they became more frequent, more necessary. He started timing his supply runs to coincide with her lunch breaks, started finding excuses to linger in town an extra hour or two, started looking forward to those visits with an intensity that would have alarmed him if he'd let himself think about it too hard. Tom Breslin finally called him on it one evening after work. "You planning on courting that girl properly, or are you just going to keep dancing around it until someone else steps in?" Calder nearly dropped the bridle he was mending. "I'm not courting anyone." Huh. And I'm the King of England." Breslin sat down on a hay bale, fixing Calder with a steady look. "Son, I've known you 7 years. I've never seen you show this much interest in anything that didn't have 4 legs and a tail. So either you're courting Miss Hanlon or you're doing a damn fine impression of it. It's complicated. It always is. That's not a reason to avoid it." Calder set down the bridle with more force than necessary. "What do I have to offer a woman like her? I'm a ranch hand who lives in a bunkhouse and owns 2 changes of clothes and a horse. She deserves better than—" She deserves to make her own choices, Breslin interrupted. And from what Mrs. Chen tells me, she looks at you like you hung the moon. So maybe stop deciding for her what she deserves and start having an honest conversation about what you both want. What if I don't know what I want? Then you're a bigger fool than I took you for. Breslin stood and headed for the door, pausing to look back. Life's short out here, Win, especially for people who wait too long to grab hold of something good when it comes their way. Think on that. Calder did think on it. Thought about it through 3 sleepless nights and 2 distracted workdays that had Breslin shaking his head in exasperation. The truth was, he did know what he wanted. He wanted Mira's smile first thing in the morning and her voice last thing at night. He wanted to build something with her, a life, a future, maybe even a family. He wanted to stop being afraid that caring about someone would lead to inevitable loss. The realization terrified him, but it also felt inevitable, like water finding its level or a compass pointing north. On Saturday, he rode into town with a plan. He'd ask Mira to take a walk with him. He'd tell her how he felt. He'd see where things went from there. Simple, terrifying, necessary. He tied Ash outside the store and pushed through the door, heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. Mrs. Chen looked up from the counter, and something in her expression made Calder's stomach drop. "She's not here," Mrs. Chen said before he could ask. "She went for a walk about an hour ago, said she needed air." "Which direction?" "East, toward the creek." Mrs. Chen hesitated. "Mr. Wynn, there were 3 strangers in town this morning, rough-looking men. They asked questions at the hotel, wanted to know if anyone matching a young woman's description had come through recently." Ice flooded Calder's veins. "Did they see her?" "I don't know. They left before she came downstairs for work. But Mr. Wynn, one of them had a scar across his lip." Calder was already moving, bursting through the door and vaulting into Ash's saddle. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Chen calling something, but the words were lost in the roar of blood in his ears. The Harlan gang. Here. Asking about Mira. He kicked Ash into a gallop, racing toward the eastern edge of town where Willow Creek wound through the cottonwoods. His mind spun through possibilities, each worse than the last. Please, he thought, though he wasn't sure who he was praying to. Please let me be wrong. Please let her be safe. He spotted her walking along the creek bank, sunlight filtering through the cottonwood leaves to dapple her dress with shadow and light. She looked peaceful, almost happy, bending to examine some wildflowers growing near the water's edge. Relief crashed through him with enough force to make his hands shake on the reins. Then he saw the 3 men on horseback emerging from the trees behind her, and relief turned to liquid fear. "Mira," he shouted, "run!" She looked up, saw him, confusion crossing her face. Then she followed his gaze and saw the riders. An understanding, terrible, complete understanding, flooded her expression. The men spurred their horses forward. Mira hiked up her skirts and ran, but she was on foot and they were mounted, and the distance between them was closing with terrifying speed. Calder drove Ash forward, angling to intercept. His hand dropped to his Colt, drawing it in one smooth motion born from years of practice. He fired once, twice, the shots kicking up dirt in front of the lead rider's horse. The horse reared, throwing off its rider's aim. The other 2 men pulled up short, reaching for their own weapons. Calder reached Mira and held out his arm. "Grab on!" She didn't hesitate. Her hand locked around his forearm and he hauled her up in front of him, settling her across the saddle. Then he was wheeling Ash around and digging in his heels, racing back toward town. Behind them, gunfire erupted. A bullet whined past Calder's ear. Another struck a tree branch, sending leaves cascading down. "Hold on!" he shouted to Mira. She pressed herself against him, her arms wrapping around his waist like iron bands. Ash stretched out into a full run, his powerful hindquarters driving them forward. The gelding had been a cavalry horse once. He knew what gunfire meant and how to move when it mattered. More shots. One caught Ash's flank in a grazing blow that made the horse surge forward with renewed speed. Calder kept low over the saddle, shielding Mira with his body as best he could while returning fire over his shoulder. The edge of town appeared ahead. People scattered at the sound of gunfire, diving for cover. Calder aimed Ash straight for the sheriff's office and hauled back on the reins so hard the horse nearly sat down. "Inside!" he ordered Mira, practically throwing her toward the office door. "Get the sheriff!" She stumbled but caught herself and ran. Behind them, the 3 riders were closing fast, But now they faced a different situation. Men were emerging from buildings with rifles. Someone rang the town's alarm bell. The Harlan gang pulled up short, reassessing. They were outnumbered now, exposed in the middle of town. The scarred man, Dex Harlan, Calder assumed, pointed at Mira's fleeing form and shouted something to his brothers. Then they wheeled their horses and galloped north, disappearing into the hills. Calder's hands were shaking as he holstered his Colt. He turned to find the sheriff, a weathered man named Pike, emerging from his office with Mira beside him. "They're gone," Calder said, voice rough. "For now." Sheriff Pike's expression was grim. "But they'll be back. Men like that don't give up easy, especially not when there's a witness who can put a noose around their necks." He looked at Mira. "Miss Hanlon, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about what you saw the day your father died." Mira nodded, her face pale but determined. Then her eyes found Calder's, and in them he saw fear and gratitude and something else. Something that made his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Again." Calder stepped forward and did something he'd been wanting to do for weeks. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, feeling her heart racing against his ribs. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe." And as she clung to him there in the middle of Main Street with half the town watching, Calder Wynn finally admitted what he'd been fighting for weeks. He was in love with Mira Hanlon. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in love. And he'd do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant facing down the Harlan gang himself. The sheriff's office smelled of old coffee and gun oil. Calder stood by the window, watching the street while Sheriff Pike questioned Mira about every detail she could remember from the day her father died. The scarred lip, the bay horse with a white blaze, the silver pocket watch they'd stolen, the way Dex Harlan had laughed before pulling the trigger. "That's enough to hang them 3 times over," Pike said grimly, closing his notebook. "Problem is catching them. They know this territory better than I do, got hideouts scattered from here to the Kansas border." He looked at Mira with something like pity. "Miss Hanlon, I'll be straight with you. Those men came to town looking for you specifically. That means they know you're a witness, and they know letting you live was a mistake they need to correct." Mira's face went paler, but her voice stayed steady. "What do you suggest, Sheriff?" "I suggest you leave. Get on the next stage to Denver or Cheyenne, somewhere with enough people that 3 outlaws can't just walk in and finish what they started." "No." The word came from Calder, sharp and final. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. "She's not running. That's what they want. To scatter her to the wind where she's alone and vulnerable." "And what's your alternative?" Pike asked. "Keep her here like bait?" "I take her to Cross Ridge." Calder turned from the window, his jaw set. "The ranch is defensible, and we've got 15 men who know how to handle rifles. Let the Harlans come if they want. We'll be ready." "You're talking about starting a range war over 1 woman." "I'm talking about keeping her alive." Calder's voice dropped to something dangerous. "And I'll do whatever that takes." Pike studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your boss going to approve this?" "Tom Breslin's a good man. He'll understand." "All right then." The sheriff stood and retrieved a Winchester from the gun rack. "I'll ride out with you, help you explain the situation, and I'll send word to the territorial marshal in Denver. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll send someone who can actually track these bastards down." Mira had been silent through this exchange, watching Calder with an expression he couldn't quite read. Now she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to bring trouble to your ranch. To put other people at risk because of me." Calder crossed to her, crouching down so they were eye level. "Mira, those men are the trouble, not you. And if we let them win, if we let them make you run scared for the rest of your life, then what kind of men are we?" He took her hand, not caring that Pike was watching. "I won't let them hurt you, I promise you that." "You can't promise something like that." "Watch me." The intensity in his eyes made Mira's breath catch. She squeezed his hand, then nodded. "All right, Cross Ridge it is." They gathered at Mrs. Chen's store to collect Mira's belongings. The shopkeeper took the news with characteristic pragmatism, pressing a carpet bag of supplies into Mira's hands and a rifle into Calder's. Take this, she said, indicating the Winchester. It belonged to my late husband. Haven't had use for it in years, but it's well maintained. She turned to Mira, her severe expression softening. You come back when this is over, you hear? Your job will be waiting. Mira embraced her, fighting tears. Thank you for everything. Go, and you. Mrs. Chen fixed Calder with a pointed stare. You keep her safe, cowboy, or you answer to me. Yes, ma'am. The ride to Cross Ridge took 3 hours, with Sheriff Pike accompanying them and 2 of his deputies following at a distance as additional security. They saw no sign of the Harlan gang, but Calder kept his hand near his Colt the entire journey, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Mira rode in front of him again, her back pressed against his chest. She'd been quiet since leaving town, and he could feel the tension thrumming through her body. You all right? He asked softly. I don't know. Her voice was barely audible over the rhythm of Ash's hooves. Everything happened so fast. One moment I was picking wildflowers, and the next, she shuddered. If you hadn't been there, I was there. That's what matters. But you won't always be. You can't guard me every moment of every day. Don't need to guard you every moment, Calder said. Just need to make it through until Pike or the marshal catches those bastards. Then you'll be free. And if they don't catch them? Calder didn't have an answer to that, so he just tightened his arm around her waist and kept riding. Cross Ridge Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, weathered gray by years of sun and wind. Around it clustered the bunkhouse, barn, cookhouse, and various outbuildings that formed the working heart of the operation. Tom Breslin stood on the main house porch as they rode up, his expression unreadable. Behind him, several ranch hands had gathered, curious about the commotion. Calder dismounted and helped Mira down, then turned to face his boss. Tom, we've got a situation. I can see that. Breslin's eyes moved from Calder to Mira to the sheriff. This about those outlaws Mrs. Chen sent word about? You heard already? Her nephew rode out an hour ago with a message. Breslin descended the porch steps, his weathered face grave. She said the Harlan gang came to town looking for Miss Hanlon here, and that you'd be bringing her to the ranch for protection. He paused. That about the size of it? Yes, sir. Sheriff Pike stepped forward. Mr. Breslin, I know this is an imposition, but Miss Hanlon is the only witness we have to a murder. If those outlaws get to her before we can bring them to justice, then justice doesn't get done, Breslin finished. He looked at Mira, his expression softening slightly. Miss, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. We'll keep you safe. Relief washed over Mira's face. Thank you, Mr. Breslin. I promise I won't be any trouble. Trouble's already here, whether you're here or not. Breslin turned to the assembled ranch hands. Listen up. We've got outlaws in the territory with designs on Miss Hanlon. From now until further notice, we post sentries at night. 2 men at all times, rotating shifts. Nobody rides out alone. Rifles stay close. Anyone sees strangers approaching, you sound the alarm immediately. Understood? A chorus of affirmatives rang out. Calder felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. These were good men, reliable men. They'd stand with him. Miss Hanlon can stay in the guest room, Breslin continued. It's on the 2nd floor of the main house, west side. Defensible position, only 1 access point. He looked at Calder. You'll bunk in the main house too, just for the duration. I want someone she trusts close by. Calder nodded. The arrangement made sense tactically, even if it did make his pulse quicken at the thought of being under the same roof as Mira every night. Sheriff Pike stayed for another hour, coordinating with Breslin about defensive positions and escape routes if things went bad. Then he mounted up with his deputies and headed back toward town, promising to return if there was any news about the Harlan gang's whereabouts. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Breslin showed Mira to her room. It was simple but comfortable, with a large window overlooking the eastern pastures and a sturdy door that could be barred from the inside. Supper's at 6, Breslin told her. Come down when you're ready. And Miss Hanlon, try not to worry too much. We've weathered Comanche raids and prairie fires. We can handle 3 outlaws with more greed than sense. After he left, Mira stood at the window and looked out over the ranch. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Closer in, men went about their evening chores, leading horses to the barn and hauling water from the well. It all looked so normal, so safe. But she knew better. She'd learned the hard way that safety was an illusion the frontier shattered without warning. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in?" Calder entered, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and a pot of coffee. "Thought you might be hungry. It's still an hour till supper." "That's kind of you." Mira accepted the tray and set it on the small table by the window. "Calder, I need to say something." He stiffened, preparing for her to tell him this was too much, that she'd decided to leave after all. "All right. I'm sorry for bringing this danger to your home, to these people who've never met me and have no reason to risk themselves on my behalf." She met his eyes. "But I'm not sorry for staying, because for the first time since my father died, I feel like maybe there's a future worth fighting for, and that's because of you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite brave enough to name. Calder took a step closer. "Mira." Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by the sound of the supper bell ringing across the ranch yard. The moment broke, and Mira let out a shaky laugh. "I should probably eat something more substantial than bread and cheese." "Yeah." Calder cleared his throat. "Yeah, we should head down." But as they descended the stairs together, his hand found the small of her back in a gesture that felt protective and possessive and right, and Mira felt warmth bloom in her chest despite everything. Supper in the ranch cookhouse was a boisterous affair. 15 men packed around a long table, passing platters of roast beef, potatoes, and biscuits while trading stories and jokes. They made space for Mira with easy hospitality, asking polite questions about her background and offering condolences about her father. One young ranch hand named Billy, barely 20 with a mop of red hair, was particularly attentive. "Miss Hanlon, if you need anything at all, anything, you just let me know. I'd be happy to help." Across the table, another hand named Rodriguez elbowed him. "Smooth, Billy, real smooth." Laughter rippled around the table. Even Mira smiled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Calder, sitting beside her, felt an unfamiliar spike of jealousy at Billy's eagerness. He told himself it was ridiculous, the kid meant well, and Mira was just being polite. But when she turned to say something to him and her knee bumped against his under the table, staying there in a contact that felt deliberate, the jealousy faded into something warmer. After supper, Breslin outlined the watch schedule. Calder drew the midnight to 4 shift with a grizzled cowboy named Hawkins. "Get some rest before then," Breslin advised. "Could be a long night." Calder walked Mira back to the main house as twilight deepened to full dark. The stars were emerging overhead, brilliant and infinite in the way they only were on the frontier, far from any city lights. "It's beautiful here," Mira said softly, looking up at the sky. "Different from Ohio. Bigger somehow. Everything's bigger out here. The sky, the distances, the consequences." Calder paused at the base of the stairs leading to her room. "You sure you're all right? It's been a hell of a day." "I'm all right." She touched his arm. "Thanks to you, again. You keep thanking me. I'm going to get a swelled head. I'll risk it." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "Calder, what if they come tonight? What if... Then we'll be ready." He covered her hand with his. "I won't let anything happen to you, Mira. I swear it." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then, before he could react, she leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Calder." She was inside her room with the door closed before he could respond, leaving him standing in the hallway with his heart hammering and his cheek burning where her lips had touched. Lord, he was in deep. The night passed without incident. Calder and Hawkins walked the perimeter of the ranch buildings, rifles in hand, seeing nothing more threatening than a coyote slinking through the shadows. By the time his shift ended at 4, Calder was exhausted and keyed up in equal measure. He slept fitfully for a few hours, then rose with the dawn to help with morning chores. The routine work, feeding horses, checking fences, hauling water, helped settle his nerves. At breakfast, Mira appeared in the cookhouse wearing a borrowed shirt and pants, her hair braided simply. She looked more like a ranch hand than a shop girl, and Calder found himself staring before he caught himself. "I thought I could help with something," she said, a little self-consciously. "I can't just sit in that room all day." Breslin considered this. "You know anything about chickens?" "I kept chickens back in Ohio. Gathered eggs every morning for 5 years. Good. The chicken coop's behind the barn. Maria usually handles it, but she threw out her back yesterday. Could use the help. So Mira spent the morning collecting eggs and mucking out the coop, work that was humble but satisfying in its simplicity. Several of the ranch hands found excuses to pass by, offering help or just making conversation. She handled their attention with grace, friendly but not encouraging. Calder watched from a distance while mending tack, fighting the urge to hover. She didn't need him hovering. She was capable and strong, finding her footing in this new environment with the same resilience she'd shown since the night he found her in the storm. But that didn't stop him from looking up every few minutes to make sure she was still there, still safe. The day passed peacefully, then the next one, and the next. A week went by with no sign of the Harlan gang. The sentries stayed vigilant, but the tension began to ease. Maybe the outlaws had decided one witness wasn't worth the risk of attacking a fortified ranch. Maybe they'd moved on to easier targets. Sheriff Pike rode out midweek with discouraging news. No sign of them anywhere in the territory. They've gone to ground or left entirely. I've got wanted posters up in every town from here to Denver, but he shrugged helplessly. But they could be anywhere, Calder finished. Or they could be planning something. Men like that don't give up easy. Despite the uncertainty, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Mira made herself useful wherever she could, helping in the cookhouse, mending clothes, even learning to handle a lasso under the amused tutelage of Rodriguez. The men grew protective of her, this quiet woman who'd brought danger, but also something softer to their rough world. And Calder found himself drawn to her like iron to a lodestone. They fell into an evening routine, walking the ranch after supper while the light faded and the stars emerged. They talked about everything and nothing, her dreams of teaching, his vague plans to maybe own his own land someday, their shared love of the wild beauty of this harsh country. They didn't talk about what was building between them. That felt too fragile, too precious to name, but it was there in every glance, every accidental touch, every silence that felt more intimate than words. 2 weeks after Mira's arrival, she received a letter. Billy brought it in from town, excited to be the bearer of news. "It's from California, Miss Hanlon. See the postmark?" Mira took the envelope with trembling hands. The return address read Samuel Hanlon, San Francisco. Her uncle, her father's brother, who she'd written to shortly after arriving in Maple Creek. She opened it in the main house parlor with Calder standing nearby, watching her face as she read. "He wants me to come to California," she said when she finished. "He says—" Her voice caught. "He says Papa wrote to him before we left Ohio, told him we were coming west. He's been waiting to hear from us. When I wrote and told him what happened—" She blinked back tears. "He says I have family there, a home, that I don't have to be alone." "That's good," Calder said, forcing the words past the tightness in his throat. "That's real good, Mira." "He sent money for the passage. Says there's a stage that runs from Denver to San Francisco, takes about 2 weeks. She looked up at him. "He sounds kind, like Papa." "I'm sure he is." Mira set the letter down carefully. "I should go, shouldn't I? It's the sensible thing. Get away from here before the Harlans come back. Start over somewhere safe." "If that's what you want." "I don't know what I want." The words burst out of her, raw and honest. "I thought I did. I thought I wanted to build a life here, in Maple Creek. I was happy at the store, happy with the friends I was making, but that was before—" She gestured helplessly. "Before all of this. Before I put everyone I care about in danger just by existing." Calder crossed to her, unable to maintain his distance any longer. "You haven't put anyone in danger. Those men did that, not you. But if you leave, I'll miss you." The words came out before he could stop them, stark and unadorned. "I'll miss you every damn day, Mira. But if California is what you need, what will keep you safe and give you peace, then you should go. You shouldn't stay out of—" He struggled for the word. "Out of obligation, or fear, or anything except what you truly want." Mira looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "And what if what I want is to stay? What if I found something here worth more than safety?" Calder's heart stopped, restarted, hammered against his ribs. "Then you should say so, clear and direct, so there's no misunderstanding." "I want to stay." Her voice was steady now, certain. "I want to stay here, at Cross Ridge in Colorado. I want to see where this goes." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is. Because it feels important, Calder. It feels like maybe the thing I've been looking for my whole life without knowing I was looking." He closed the remaining distance between them and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I'm not good at this. At saying what I feel. But Mira, you've gotten under my skin in a way I can't shake and don't want to. And the thought of you leaving, of watching you ride out of here and never knowing what we might have had, that's worse than any danger the Harlans could bring. Then ask me to stay. Say it outright. Stay." The word was rough, desperate. "Stay here with me. Let me court you proper, the way you deserve. Let me show you that what we have is real and worth fighting for." Mira's answer was to rise on her toes and kiss him. Not the chaste brush of lips from a week ago, but a real kiss, full of longing and hope, and the desperate need to feel alive after too much death. Calder pulled her close, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. She tasted like coffee and courage, and kissing her felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mira rested her forehead against his chest. "I'll write to my uncle. Tell him thank you, but I'm staying, that I found something, someone, worth staying for. He'll understand. And if the Harlans come? Then we'll face them together." Calder tilted her chin up so she met his eyes. "But Mira, I need you to understand something. If they come, things could get bad. I'll do everything in my power to protect you, but I'm not invincible. None of us are." "I know." She touched his face gently. "But I'd rather face danger with you than safety without you. Is that crazy?" "Maybe a little." He smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "But I'll take it." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, neither wanting to move and break the moment. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the tree line half a mile distant, a man with a scarred lip and murder in his eyes. That night, the Harlan gang made their move. It started with fire. Billy, on sentry duty, smelled smoke around midnight and raised the alarm. By the time Calder burst from the main house with his rifle, the barn was engulfed in flames. "It's a diversion!" Breslin shouted over the roar of the fire. "Half you men get water on that barn. Save the horses. The rest, defensive positions around the main house." Chaos erupted. Men ran in all directions, some hauling buckets from the well, others taking cover behind water troughs and fence posts with rifles at the ready. The horses in the barn were screaming, terrified by the smoke and flames. Calder's mind raced through possibilities. If this was a diversion, where was the real attack? His blood turned to ice. The house. They'd burned the barn to draw defenders away, then hit the house where Mira was sleeping. He was sprinting for the main house when gunfire erupted from the darkness. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like deadly fireflies. A bullet whined past Calder's ear. Another struck the porch railing, sending splinters flying. He dove through the front door and took the stairs 3 at a time. "Mira!" Her door flew open. She stood there in her nightdress, eyes wide with fear, holding the rifle Mrs. Chen had given her. "They're here," she said unnecessarily. "I know. Come with me, right now." He grabbed her hand and pulled her down the stairs toward Breslin's study on the ground floor. It had the fewest windows and the most solid walls. A defensible position if it came to that. More gunfire outside. Calder heard someone scream, one of the ranch hands. He couldn't tell who. His grip on Mira's hand tightened. They'd almost reached the study when glass shattered upstairs, a window being broken. Someone was in the house. Calder shoved Mira toward the study door. "Get inside, bar the door, don't come out for anyone but me or Breslin." "But, go." She went, her face pale but determined. The door closed behind her, and Calder heard the bar slide into place. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots, moving fast. Calder pressed himself against the wall and raised his Colt. A man appeared at the top of the stairs, big, bearded, with wild eyes, and a gun in each hand. One of the Harlan brothers, Ray or Cole. "Where is she?" the man bellowed. "We know she's in here," Calder fired. The bullet caught the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped one gun, but kept the other, returning fire wildly. The shots went wide, punching holes in the ceiling and walls. Calder fired again. This time the bullet found its mark, center mass, and the outlaw went down hard, tumbling down the stairs to lie motionless at the bottom. No time to process it. More footsteps, this time on the porch. Calder moved to the front door, kicked it open, and found himself face to face with another man, younger than the first, with the same wild-eyed desperation. Cole Harlan. They fired simultaneously. Calder felt the bullet graze his ribs, a line of fire that stole his breath. His own shot took Cole in the leg, dropping him to his knees. "You son of a—" Cole tried to bring his gun up. Calder kicked it out of his hand and leveled his Colt at the outlaw's head. "Don't!" Outside, the gunfire was tapering off. Breslin's voice cut through the chaos. "Calder! Report!" "Main house is clear," Calder called back, not taking his eyes off Cole Harlan. "Got 2 of them down. Where's the third?" Ran off toward the creek when he saw his brothers go down. Rodriguez and Hawkins went after him. More footsteps, these ones familiar. Breslin appeared in the doorway with 3 ranch hands, their faces smudged with soot from fighting the barn fire. "Jesus," Breslin breathed, taking in the scene. "You all right?" "I'll live." Calder pressed a hand to his bleeding ribs. "Mira's in the study." Someone was already pounding on that door. "Miss Hanlon, it's Tom Breslin. You can come out now." The bar scraped, and Mira emerged. Her eyes found Calder immediately, widening at the blood seeping between his fingers. She rushed to him, her hands fluttering over his injury. "How bad is it?" "Just a graze. I've had worse." "You're bleeding." "I'll be fine." He caught her hands, stilling them. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm—" Her gaze shifted to the body at the bottom of the stairs, then to Cole Harlan groaning on the porch. Her face went pale. "Is he— Did you—" "I did what I had to do." Calder's voice was flat. He'd killed men before, in the war and once since. It never got easier. Mira nodded slowly, processing. Then, to his surprise, she straightened and looked him in the eye. "Thank you for protecting me, for—" She gestured at the carnage around them. "For this." Before Calder could respond, Rodriguez and Hawkins returned, dragging a third man between them. Dex Harlan, the scarred leader himself, bloody and beaten, but alive. "Caught him trying to ford the creek," Hawkins reported. "Put up a fight, but we convinced him to come peaceful-like." Sheriff Pike arrived an hour later with a posse, summoned by the ranch hand Breslin had sent when the attack started. He surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. "2 dead, 1 in custody," he said, scribbling notes. "That'll close the book on the Harlan gang for good." He looked at Mira. "Miss Hanlon, you're free now. Free to live your life without looking over your shoulder." The words took a moment to sink in. Free. After weeks of fear, of waiting for the other boot to drop, it was finally over. Mira swayed on her feet. Calder caught her, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. "Easy, you've had a shock." "We both have." She looked up at him, this man who'd saved her life more times than she could count, who'd killed to protect her, who'd offered her not just safety but something far more precious, a future worth living. "Come on," Calder said gently. "Let's get you somewhere you can sit down." As dawn broke over Cross Ridge Ranch, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat together on the porch of the main house. The barn smoldered in ruins, and Doc Harrison was inside patching up Calder's ribs while muttering about stubborn cowboys who thought they were immortal. But they were alive, both of them. And the men who'd brought so much death and fear were finally gone. "It's really over," Mira said, as if testing the words. "Yeah." Calder reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "It's really over. So what happens now?" He looked at her, this woman who'd crashed into his life during a storm and changed everything. Who'd made him want things he'd thought he'd given up on, a home, a family, a future that extended beyond the next paycheck and the next lonely night. "Now," he said, "we figure out what comes next, together." Mira squeezed his hand and leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sun rise on their first day of freedom. And despite everything, the violence, the fear, the pain, she smiled. Because she'd found something in this harsh, beautiful land that she'd never expected to find. She'd found home, and she'd found love. And that was worth every moment of darkness they'd endured to reach this dawn. The morning light was kind to the devastation. It softened the charred remains of the barn and turned the smoke still rising from the ruins into something almost ethereal. Calder sat on the porch steps with his ribs bandaged tight, watching the ranch hands begin the work of cleanup and repair. Doc Harrison had given him laudanum for the pain, but he'd refused it. He wanted his mind clear. Mira emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving carefully as if the ground beneath her feet might still shift without warning. She'd changed into one of her borrowed work dresses and pinned her hair back, but exhaustion shadowed her eyes. "You should be resting," Calder said as she settled beside him. "So should you." She handed him one of the cups. "But here we both are." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the sun climb higher. Billy and Rodriguez were hauling scorched timber from the barn wreckage. Hawkins was checking the horses they'd managed to save, making sure none had suffered smoke damage to their lungs. The rhythm of work, of rebuilding, was already asserting itself. "2 men are dead because of me," Mira said quietly. Calder turned to look at her. "2 men are dead because they chose to murder your father and then tried to murder you. That's on them, not you. I know that up here," she tapped her temple, "but here," she pressed a hand to her chest. "Here I keep seeing that man at the bottom of the stairs, and I keep thinking about his family, if he had one, about someone somewhere who'll be waiting for him to come home. Men like that don't have families waiting. They burn those bridges long before they end up lying dead in someone else's house." Calder set down his coffee cup and took her hand. "Mira, look at me." She did, her dark eyes swimming with unshed tears. "You survived," he said firmly. "You survived something that would have broken most people. You kept going, kept fighting, kept your dignity and your courage even when the world gave you every reason to give up. Your father would be proud of that. And you should be too." "How do you know what my father would think?" "Because any man who raised a daughter like you, strong and kind and brave, would be proud." Calder brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And because I'm proud of you, for what that's worth." The tears spilled over then. Mira leaned into him, careful of his injured ribs, and let herself cry properly for the first time since the attack. Not the desperate, terrified sobs of that first night in the storm, but something deeper and more cleansing, grief and relief, and the bone-deep exhaustion of finally being safe. Calder held her and said nothing, just let her cry herself out while the morning warmed around them. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand, she managed a watery smile. "I'm sorry, I'm getting your shirt all wet." "I've got other shirts." Still, she took a shaky breath. "What happens now? With the ranch, I mean. The barn is gone, and I know that must be a huge loss." "We'll rebuild." Breslin's voice came from behind them. He stood in the doorway looking older than he had yesterday, but no less solid. "Already sent word to Maple Creek for timber. The insurance payout from the Cattlemen's Association should cover most of it, and we've got enough hands to do the work ourselves." "I'm so sorry," Mira started, but Breslin held up a hand. "Don't. We made the choice to protect you, Miss Hanlon. All of us. And we'd make it again." He came down the steps and surveyed his ranch with the practiced eye of a man who'd weathered hard times before. "We've rebuilt after worse. Prairie fire in '74 took out half our structures. Blizzard of '76 killed 30 head of cattle. We survived those. We'll survive this." "How can I help?" Mira asked. "I can't just stand by while everyone else—" "You can help by healing," Breslin interrupted gently. "Both of you. You've been through hell, and pushing through like nothing happened isn't courage, it's foolishness." He looked at Calder. "You're on light duty for at least a week. No riding, no heavy lifting, just supervision and tasks you can do one-handed." "Tom, I can still—" "That's an order, Win. You tear those stitches open being stubborn, and Doc Harrison will have both our hides." Calder wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. "Yes, sir." "Good." Breslin turned to go back inside, then paused. "Miss Hanlon, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. We could use someone to help organize the rebuilding efforts, keeping track of supplies, coordinating schedules, that sort of thing. It's not exciting work, but it's necessary." "I'd be honored," Mira said. Over the next week, Cross Ridge Ranch transformed into a hive of purposeful activity. The timber arrived from Maple Creek, hauled out in 3 wagons. A crew from town came to help with the barn reconstruction, payment for times the ranch had sent hands to help with town projects. Even Mrs. Chen showed up one day with her wagon full of supplies and a no-nonsense attitude. "I brought food," she announced. "Working men need to eat. And you," she pointed at Mira, "you look like you need about a week of sleep and 10 pounds of meat on your bones." Mira laughed, the sound still a little fragile but genuine. "It's good to see you, Mrs. Chen." "Good to see you alive, girl." The older woman's stern expression softened. "I worried. But I should have known. You're tougher than you look. Takes after your father that way." The mention of Thomas Hanlon brought the familiar ache, but it was gentler now. Time and safety were beginning to work their slow magic, not erasing the loss but making it bearable. Mira threw herself into the work of coordination. She set up a makeshift office in the ranch house parlor with ledgers tracking lumber quantities, nail counts, work schedules, and meal rotations. She wrote letters to suppliers, negotiated prices, and somehow managed to charm extra concessions out of merchants who usually drove hard bargains. "You've got a head for business," Breslin observed one afternoon, looking over her neatly organized accounts. "Ever think about running your own operation?" "I was a schoolteacher's daughter," Mira replied. "The closest I got to business was managing our household budget." "Well, you're a natural. When all this is done, if you want to learn the cattle trade, I'd be happy to teach you. Never hurts to have someone who can manage the books and understand the work." The offer touched Mira more than she expected. It was validation, respect, proof that she had value beyond being a victim who needed protecting. Calder watched her bloom over those days with something like awe. The fragile, grieving girl he'd found in the storm was still there, but she was growing stronger, finding her footing in this new life. She laughed more easily now, moved with more confidence, looked at the future as something to build rather than something to fear. And she looked at him with eyes that made his heart do complicated things in his chest. They stole moments together when they could. An evening walk after supper when the work was done. A shared cup of coffee before dawn when they were both awake too early. Conversations that ranged from the practical to the profound, building connection with every word. "Tell me about the war," Mira said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Calder stiffened. "Why?" "Because it's part of who you are. And I want to know you, all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I was 19 when I enlisted. Thought it would be an adventure, a chance to see something beyond the Kansas farm where I'd been working since my parents died. Figured the war would be over in 6 months and I'd come home a hero." He laughed bitterly. "I was an idiot." "You were young." "I was old enough to know better." Calder stared at the darkening horizon. "It wasn't glorious. It wasn't adventure. It was mud and blood and watching boys younger than me die in ways no one should die. I did things," his voice caught, "things I'm not proud of. Things that were necessary in the moment, but that I'll carry for the rest of my life." Mira took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You survived. And you came out of it still able to care about people, still able to show kindness. That's not nothing, Calder. Sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. It's enough for me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and found only acceptance in her eyes. No judgment, no horror at what he'd implied about his past. Just steady, unwavering acceptance. "You're something special, Mira Hanlon," he said softly. "So are you, Calder Wynn." The barn reconstruction took 2 weeks. When the last beam was raised and the roof secured, Breslin declared a celebration. He had a steer slaughtered and hired a fiddler from town, and as the sun set on a Saturday evening, Cross Ridge Ranch came alive with music and laughter. Mira had never been to a frontier dance before. Back in Ohio, there had been church socials with proper waltzes and rigid propriety. This was something else entirely, wild and joyful, with couples spinning in chaotic patterns while the fiddle wailed and someone kept rhythm with spoons on a washboard. "Come on," Billy said, appearing at her elbow with his characteristic enthusiasm. "You can't sit out all evening, Miss Hanlon. It's bad luck." "I don't know the steps," Mira protested. "Doesn't matter. Half of us don't either. That's part of the fun. He pulled her into the swirl of dancers before she could argue further. The dance was indeed chaotic, more enthusiasm than technique, but there was something liberating about it. About moving without thinking, letting the music carry her, laughing when she stumbled and no one cared. Calder watched from the sidelines, still favoring his injured ribs. He told himself he was content to watch, but when Rodriguez cut in on Billy and swept Mira into an even more enthusiastic reel, jealousy spiked sharp and undeniable. Mrs. Chen, who'd stayed for the celebration, appeared beside him with a knowing look. Going to stand here sulking all night, or are you going to claim what's yours? She's not mine to claim, Calder said. No? Then why does she keep looking over here every 30 seconds to see if you're watching? Mrs. Chen shook her head. For a smart man, you're being remarkably stupid about this. Before Calder could formulate a response, the song ended. The fiddler announced a slower tune, and couples rearranged themselves accordingly. Rodriguez gallantly escorted Mira back toward the sidelines, but Calder intercepted them halfway. May I? He asked, extending his hand. Mira's face lit up. I thought you'd never ask. They moved into the slower rhythm of the waltz, Calder's hand settling on her waist, while hers rested on his shoulder. His ribs protested slightly, but he ignored the discomfort. This was worth it. Having fun? He asked. More than I expected. This is nothing like the dances back home. Too wild for you. Too honest. She smiled up at him. Back home, everything was about propriety and status. Here, people just live. It's refreshing. The frontier strips away a lot of pretense, Calder agreed, for better and worse. They danced in silence for a while, moving together with an ease that felt natural despite their limited practice. Around them, other couples swayed and turned, but Calder was barely aware of them. His world had narrowed to Mira's face, her hand in his, the warmth of her body close to his. Calder, she said softly. Thank you. For what? For stopping that night in the storm. For every choice you've made since then that brought us here. She paused. For giving me a reason to stay. Mira, He struggled for words adequate to what he felt. I don't have much to offer. I'm a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of rough edges. But what I do have, everything I am, it's yours if you want it. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Is it enough? It's everything. The song ended, but neither of them moved. They stood in the middle of the makeshift dance floor, staring at each other while the fiddler struck up a livelier tune and other couples swirled around them. I should tell you something, Mira said. I wrote to my uncle in San Francisco. I told him I wouldn't be coming, that I'd found a life here worth staying for. Calder's heart hammered. And he wrote back yesterday. He said he understood, that he was happy for me, and if I ever needed anything, all I had to do was ask. She took a breath. He also said that Papa had told him about you in his last letter, about the cowboy I'd mentioned meeting on the trail, who'd been kind when we needed help with the wagon repair. Your father knew about me? Not much, just that there was a ranch hand named Calder who'd helped us fix our axle a few days before. Her voice broke. Before everything happened. But Papa wrote that you seemed like a good man, honest and capable, the kind of man he'd hoped I might find out here. The weight of that hit Calder like a fist. Thomas Hanlon, dead because he'd shown kindness to the wrong men, had somehow seen something in Calder worth noting, worth approving of. I'll try to be worthy of that, Calder said roughly, of his faith and yours. You already are. They might have kissed right there, in front of the whole ranch, if Tom Breslin hadn't chosen that moment to climb onto a wagon bed and call for everyone's attention. Listen up, he shouted over the music. The fiddler stopped playing, and the crowd turned. I want to thank everyone who helped rebuild our barn. This ranch is more than just buildings and cattle. It's people. People who show up when times are hard and work together to make things right. That's what makes Cross Ridge special. Cheers and applause erupted. Breslin waited for it to die down before continuing. I also want to acknowledge two people in particular, Calder Wynn and Mira Hanlon. They faced down outlaws to protect not just themselves but all of us. They showed courage under fire and never once complained or asked for special treatment. He raised his glass. To Calder and Mira. May they find all the happiness they deserve. The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, and Mira felt her face flush hot. Beside her, Calder looked equally uncomfortable with the attention, but touched nonetheless. The party continued into the night, but eventually the crowd began to thin. Families with children headed home. The older ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse. By midnight, only a handful of people remained around the fire, trading stories and passing a bottle of whiskey. Calder and Mira walked away from the noise, following a path that led up a small hill overlooking the ranch. From here, they could see the new barn standing solid in the moonlight, the house with its warm lights, the corrals where horses dozed standing up. It's beautiful, Mira said. All of it. The land, the ranch, the life people are building here. It's hard too, Calder cautioned. Winters that'll freeze you solid if you're not careful. Summers so hot you think you'll melt. Drought, disease, predators, both animal and human. The frontier gives with one hand and takes with the other. I know. But nothing worth having comes easy. She turned to face him. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You already had that strength in you. Maybe. But you helped me find it again when I thought I'd lost it forever. She moved closer. Calder, I meant what I said in my letter to my uncle. I found something here worth staying for, and that something is you. His breath caught. Mira, I need you to be sure. Because once I hear those words, once I let myself really believe them, there's no going back for me. You'll have all of me, every scarred, broken piece. I'm sure. She took his hands in hers. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Calder pulled her close and kissed her under the vast Colorado sky, with stars wheeling overhead and the sound of music drifting up from the ranch below. It was a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility, of two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and decided to build something real from the ashes of tragedy. When they finally broke apart, Calder rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, court you proper, with everyone knowing my intentions. And when the time is right, I want to ask you to marry me in front of your father's grave, so he knows I'll honor his memory by taking care of you. Tears streamed down Mira's face. You don't have to wait for the right time. Ask me now. Now? Right now, here, because this moment feels perfect, and I don't want to wait another second to say yes. Calder's heart was thundering so hard he thought it might break free of his chest. He took her hands, holding them gently. Mira Hanlon, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise you an easy life or wealth or any of the things you probably deserve, but I can promise you I'll work every day to make you happy. I'll protect you with my life. I'll build us a home where we can grow old together. And I'll love you until my last breath and probably beyond. Yes, the word came out choked with emotion. Yes, Calder, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife and your partner and whatever else you need me to be. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite the protest from his healing ribs. Her laughter rang out across the hillside, clear and joyful and free. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. We should go tell people, Mira said. We should. But neither of them moved, content to stay in this perfect moment a while longer. Eventually, they made their way back down the hill to the ranch, hand in hand. The few remaining partygoers took one look at their faces and knew immediately what had happened. About damn time, Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. The news spread quickly. By morning, everyone at Cross Ridge knew that Calder Wynn and Mira Hanlon were engaged. The reaction was universally positive. Even Billy, who'd harbored a small crush on Mira, congratulated them with genuine warmth. You're good for him, Tom Breslin told Mira privately. I've known Calder for years, and I've never seen him this happy. This settled. You gave him something to care about beyond just surviving day to day. He gave me the same thing, Mira replied. A future when I thought I'd lost everything. The weeks following the engagement were some of the happiest of Mira's life. She and Calder made plans, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. They'd marry in the spring, giving Calder time to save enough money to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to Cross Ridge. Breslin had agreed to sell it to him at a fair price, and the plan was to build a modest house there. something they could expand as their family grew. The thought of a family, children playing in a yard, growing up under these vast skies, made Mira's heart ache with longing. She'd lost so much, but the universe was offering her a chance to build something new, something beautiful and lasting. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into something ethereal. Mira learned to handle the cold, layering clothes and keeping close to fires. She also learned ranch work, not just bookkeeping, but practical skills like handling horses, mending tack, even helping with winter calving when extra hands were needed. "You're a natural," Rodriguez observed one frigid morning as Mira helped him deliver a difficult calf. "Most city folk can't handle this work, but you just dig in." "I'm not city folk anymore," Mira said simply. And it was true. Somewhere between that night in the storm and now, she'd transformed. The frontier had marked her, changed her, made her stronger. On a clear December afternoon, Calder and Mira rode out to the small rise where Thomas Hanlon was buried. The wooden cross Calder had fashioned had been replaced by a proper headstone, Mira's first purchase with her wages from working at the ranch. They stood before the grave in silence for a moment, then Calder spoke. "Mr. Hanlon, I don't know if you can hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your daughter is the finest woman I've ever known. She's brave and kind and stronger than she knows. And I love her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." He paused, gathering his words. "I promise I'll take care of her. I'll build her a good life. I'll make sure she never regrets choosing to stay in Colorado. And I'll tell our children about you, about the teacher who loved learning and who raised a daughter worth crossing storms for." Mira was crying openly now. She knelt and placed a small bouquet of dried wildflowers on her father's grave. "I miss you, Papa, every single day, but I hope, you'd be happy for me, that you'd approve of Calder and the life we're building." She touched the headstone gently. "Thank you for teaching me to be strong, for showing me that endings can be beginnings if you're brave enough to let them." They stood there a while longer, paying their respects to the man whose death had brought them together. Then they mounted up and rode back toward Cross Ridge, toward the future they were building together. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, smoke rising from chimneys, cattle grazing in snow-dusted fields, the new barn standing proud, Calder felt something shift inside him. For so many years he'd been drifting, just surviving without any real purpose or direction. But looking at Mira beside him, her face bright with cold and happiness, he finally understood what it meant to have something worth living for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. "I love you," he said suddenly. "I don't say it enough, but I do. More than anything." Mira smiled at him, that smile that had first broken through his defenses months ago. "I love you too. And we're going to be so happy, Calder. I can feel it." "Yeah," he agreed, reaching across the gap between their horses to take her hand. "Yeah, I think we are." And as they rode down toward home together, the winter sun breaking through the clouds to paint everything in shades of gold, Calder Wynne allowed himself to believe in something he'd given up on long ago. He believed in second chances, in love found in unlikely places, in the possibility that even the hardest beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. He believed in their future, and for a man who'd spent most of his life just trying to survive the present, that was nothing short of miraculous. Winter deepened its hold on the Colorado Territory, transforming the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Snow blanketed the plains in white that sparkled like diamonds under the sun, and the nights grew so cold that water left in buckets froze solid by morning. But inside the ranch house at Cross Ridge, warmth prevailed, both from the fires burning in every hearth and from the anticipation that filled the air like electricity before a storm. Spring was coming, and with it, a wedding. Mira spent the long winter evenings working on her dress with Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on helping despite the weekly journey from town. The fabric was simple ivory cotton, nothing fancy, but Mrs. Chen's skilled fingers transformed it into something beautiful with delicate embroidery along the collar and cuffs. "My mother taught me this pattern," Mrs. Chen said one evening, her needle flashing in the lamplight. "She said it brings good fortune to new brides, protection and prosperity." "Did it work for you?" Mira asked. Mrs. Chen's expression grew distant. "My husband died young, left me with debts and a child to raise alone. But I survived, built a good business, raised a son who, foolish as he is chasing gold, at least has the courage to chase his dreams. She looked at Mira directly. Fortune isn't just about money or easy living. Sometimes it's about having the strength to weather the storms. In that way, yes, the pattern worked. Mira traced the delicate stitching with her finger. I want that. Not easy living, but the strength to handle whatever comes. You already have it. You proved that the night you faced down those outlaws with a shotgun. The memory still gave Mira nightmares sometimes. The weight of the gun in her hands, the fear that she'd be too late, the moment when she'd pulled the trigger knowing that hesitation would cost Calder his life. But she'd done it. She'd been strong enough when it mattered most. Do you think it ever gets easier? Mira asked quietly. Living with what we've done, what we've seen? Mrs. Chen set down her sewing and took Mira's hand. No, but you learn to carry it better, and having someone to share the weight, that helps more than you know. While Mira prepared for the wedding, Calder threw himself into building their future home. The parcel of land Breslin had sold him sat in a valley 2 miles east of the main ranch, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods and bisected by a clear-running creek. It was good land, fertile and protected, with enough grazing for a small herd and space to expand. Every spare moment, Calder worked on the cabin. Tom Breslin had given him permission to use ranch resources and occasional help from the other hands. They'd laid the foundation in late autumn before the ground froze, and now through the winter months, the structure slowly took shape. You're building this thing like it's a fortress, Rodriguez observed one Saturday afternoon, watching Calder fit massive logs together with careful precision. Want it to last, Calder replied, checking the level on a wall beam. Want our children to grow up here, maybe their children too. That means building it right the first time. Children, huh? Rodriguez grinned. You two planning on getting started on that right away? Calder felt heat rise in his face, but didn't rise to the bait. Planning on building a life, however that unfolds. The truth was, he thought about it constantly, the future stretching out before him in a way it never had before. Children with Mira's dark eyes and stubborn courage. Teaching them to ride and rope, watching them grow up under these vast skies. Growing old together on this land they'd build together, facing whatever came as partners. It was a future that terrified him with its brightness, its possibility. For so long he'd kept his dreams small and manageable. But Mira had changed that. She'd shown him that reaching for something bigger was worth the risk of it slipping through your fingers. On a clear February afternoon, Calder rode into Maple Creek to meet with the circuit preacher who'd agreed to perform their wedding ceremony. Reverend Marcus was a weathered man in his 60s who'd been riding the Colorado Territory for 20 years, bringing religion to frontier towns that saw a proper minister maybe 3 or 4 times a year. So you're the young man who's marrying the Hanlon girl, Marcus said, sizing Calder up with sharp eyes. I heard about what happened to her father. Terrible business. Yes, sir. And you're the one who saved her from the storm, protected her from those outlaws. It wasn't a question. I did what anyone would have done. No. Marcus shook his head firmly. Most men would have kept riding, would have decided she wasn't their problem. You didn't. That says something about your character. He leaned back in his chair. Marriage is hard, son, especially out here where life itself is hard. What makes you think you're ready for it? Calder considered the question carefully. I'm not sure anyone's ever really ready, but I know I want to spend my life with Mira. Want to build something with her that's bigger than either of us alone. And I'm willing to work every day to make that happen. Do you love her? More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Marcus nodded slowly. That's a good start. Love alone isn't enough. You need commitment and work and grace to forgive each other's failures. But without love, all the rest is just going through motions. He pulled out a worn Bible. Let's talk about the ceremony. They spent an hour discussing vows and readings. Mira wanted her father's favorite passage from Corinthians, the one about love being patient and kind. Calder asked for something simple and honest, words that meant something real rather than just sounding pretty. I can work with that, Marcus said. I'll craft something that honors both requests. As Calder prepared to leave, the Reverend called him back. One more thing, son. I've married a lot of couples over the years. Some make it, some don't. The ones who do, they're the ones who remember that marriage isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections you can live with, whose strengths complement your weaknesses. From what I've heard about Miss Hanlon, you've found that. Don't take it for granted. I won't, sir. I promise you that. The winter slowly loosened its grip. By mid-March, the snow had melted from all but the highest peaks, and the first green shoots of grass were appearing across the plains. Wildflowers bloomed in sudden profusions of color: purple lupine, yellow arnica, delicate blue columbine. The world was waking up, and with it came a sense of renewal that touched everything. The cabin was finished 3 weeks before the wedding. Calder and Mira walked through it together on a warm spring evening, their footsteps echoing on the fresh-swept floors. "The main room is bigger than I expected," Mira said, taking in the open space with its stone fireplace and large windows facing east to catch the morning sun. "Wanted room to grow," Calder explained. "Room for children to play, for a proper table where we can gather for meals." He showed her the bedroom, the small spare room that could serve as a nursery or guest quarters, the kitchen with its cast-iron stove. It was simple, rough in places, but solid and well-made. More importantly, it was theirs. Not borrowed, not temporary. A real home. Mira turned to him with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect." "Yeah?" Relief flooded through him. He'd worried she'd find it too plain, too rough compared to what she'd known back in Ohio. "Yeah." She wrapped her arms around him. "I can see our whole life here. Can see us sitting by that fireplace in winter, working in the garden come summer, raising our children in these rooms. It's everything I didn't know I wanted." Calder held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "3 more weeks," he murmured. "Then it's official. Then you're really mine. I'm already yours." She pulled back to look at him. "Have been since you whispered that I was safe in the middle of that storm. You just didn't know it yet." He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into that connection. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting, painting their new home in shades of gold and amber. "Come on," Calder said, taking her hand. "We should head back before it gets full dark. Don't want anyone worrying." But they lingered a moment longer, standing in the doorway of their future, watching the day fade into night. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April. The night before, Mira barely slept. She lay in her room at the ranch house, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how much had changed in the 8 months since that terrible storm. She'd lost everything that night: her father, her possessions, her sense of safety in the world. But she'd also found something, a strength she didn't know she possessed, a community that had embraced her, and a love that had transformed her understanding of what was possible. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mira, you awake?" Mrs. Chen's voice. Mira rose and opened the door to find the older woman standing there with a small wooden box. "Couldn't sleep either," Mrs. Chen said. "Figured you might want company." They sat together on the bed, and Mrs. Chen opened the box to reveal a beautiful jade bracelet. "This belonged to my mother," she said, "and her mother before her. It's been in my family for 4 generations." She held it up to the lamplight where it gleamed soft green. "I want you to have it. For your wedding. Something old, something borrowed, something from family, since yours can't be here." Mira's throat tightened with emotion. "Mrs. Chen, I can't accept something so valuable. You can and you will. You're like a daughter to me, girl, the daughter I never had." Mrs. Chen fastened the bracelet around Mira's wrist. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, of the life you're building. I'm proud too." They embraced, and Mira finally let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being seen and valued and loved by this fierce, kind woman who'd given her a chance when she'd had nothing. "Thank you," Mira whispered, "for everything, for the job, for your friendship, for believing in me." "Thank you for reminding me why I work so hard," Mrs. Chen replied. "It's for moments like this, for watching good people find happiness." Dawn came clear and bright, with a warmth that promised true spring had finally arrived. Calder woke in the bunkhouse and lay there for a moment, letting reality settle over him. Today was his wedding day. By nightfall, Mira would be his wife. The thought filled him with equal parts joy and terror. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Tom Breslin said over breakfast. "It's supposed to be a happy day, Win." "It is happy, just also terrifying." "That's marriage," Breslin clapped him on the shoulder. "But you'll be fine. You two are solid." The ceremony was set for noon at the small church in Maple Creek. The entire town seemed to have turned out, packing the pews and spilling out into the street. Ranch hands from Cross Ridge mingled with shopkeepers and farmers, all dressed in their best clothes. Calder stood at the altar with Rodriguez beside him as best man, his heart hammering so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. Reverend Marcus waited patiently, a slight smile on his weathered face. Then the door opened and Mira appeared. She wore the ivory dress Mrs. Chen had helped her make, simple but beautiful. Her dark hair was pinned up with wildflowers woven through it. The jade bracelet gleamed on her wrist. But what struck Calder most was her expression, pure joy mixed with a determination that said she was choosing this, choosing him, with her whole heart. Tom Breslin walked her down the aisle, standing in for the father who should have been there. When they reached the altar, Breslin placed Mira's hand in Calder's and whispered, "Take care of her, son." "With my life," Calder promised. Reverend Marcus began the ceremony with the traditional words, but when it came time for the vows, he shifted to something more personal. "Calder and Mira have asked to speak their own promises to each other," he announced. "Calder, if you would." Calder took both of Mira's hands, looking into her eyes. "Mira, I'm not good with fancy words, but I promise you this, I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I'll work hard to build us a good home, to provide for our family, to be a man you can be proud of. I'll protect you when I can, support you always, and stand beside you through whatever comes. You saved me from loneliness, from just drifting through life without purpose, and I promise to spend the rest of my days being worthy of that gift." Mira's eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled. "Calder, you found me in the worst moment of my life and showed me kindness when you had every reason to keep writing. You gave me safety, gave me hope, gave me a reason to keep fighting. I promise to be your partner in building this life together. I'll stand with you in hard times and celebrate with you in good ones. I'll love you fiercely and honestly, and I'll never take for granted the miracle of having found you in that storm." "Then by the power vested in me," Reverend Marcus said, his voice warm with approval, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Calder, you may kiss your bride." Calder did, pulling Mira close and kissing her with all the love and promise he felt. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause, but he barely heard them. His entire world had narrowed to this woman in his arms, this moment that marked the beginning of their shared future. The celebration that followed was joyful and chaotic. Tables had been set up in the town square, loaded with food that everyone had contributed. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter. Even Sheriff Pike showed up, offering his congratulations and a bottle of good whiskey. "To think all this started with me pulling you over for disturbing the peace by riding too fast through town," Pike joked. "Best arrest I never made." As the afternoon wore on, Calder and Mira found themselves standing at the edge of the celebration, watching their friends and neighbors enjoy the party. "Happy?" Calder asked. "Deliriously." Mira leaned against him. "I keep thinking about that night in the storm. How terrified I was. How certain I was that my life was over. And now? Now I know it was just beginning." She turned to face him. "Thank you for stopping, Calder. Thank you for being brave enough to get involved when you could have just kept writing. I couldn't leave you there. Something in me knew, even then, that you were important, that you'd change everything." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Turns out, I was right." As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and mounted Ash together, riding toward their new home. The cabin waited for them, windows glowing with lamplight that Rodriguez had lit earlier. Their home, their future. Inside, they found that the ranch hands had stocked the kitchen with supplies, left wildflowers in jars on every surface, and laid a fire in the hearth. Small gestures of love and support from people who'd become family. "Alone at last," Mira said softly, looking around the main room. Finally, Calder pulled her close. Mrs. Wynne. She smiled at the name. Mr. Wynne. That night, they began their life together in earnest, learning each other in the lamplight, building connection and intimacy with the same careful attention Calder had used to build their home. And in the morning, when sunlight streamed through the east-facing windows, they woke tangled together and utterly content. The first year of marriage brought challenges neither had fully anticipated. The land Calder had bought needed extensive work, fences repaired, irrigation ditches dug, a garden plot cleared and planted. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their hands blistering and their backs aching, learning the rhythms of making a life from scratch. There were arguments about money, about priorities, about how to handle a broken axle or a sick cow. Calder could be stubborn to the point of pig-headedness, and Mira had a temper that flared hot when pushed. But they learned to fight fair, to listen even when angry, to remember that they were on the same side. And there were moments of transcendent joy, the first vegetables from their garden, the purchase of their first 3 cows. The night Mira announced she was pregnant, her face glowing with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Already?" Calder said, stunned. "Apparently." Mira took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" "Happy." He pulled her into his arms, emotion overwhelming him. "I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A baby. Our baby." Their daughter was born in late spring, delivered by Doc Harrison with Mrs. Chen in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Calder paced outside the bedroom door, convinced he was about to lose everything that mattered. But Mira was strong, and when the baby's first cry split the air, relief crashed over him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. "You have a daughter," Mrs. Chen said, emerging with a smile. "A healthy, loud daughter, and your wife did beautifully." Calder entered the bedroom to find Mira propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Mrs. Chen's quilts. The baby had a shock of dark hair and her mother's delicate features. "She's perfect," Mira whispered. "Look at her, Calder. She's perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his daughter. This tiny human who was part him and part Mira, and entirely her own person. Something fierce and protective surged through him, a love so powerful it was almost painful. "What should we name her?" he asked. Mira had been thinking about this for months. "Grace. Grace Elena Wynne. Elena was my mother's name, and Grace because—" She looked at her husband with eyes full of meaning. "Because Grace is what brought us together. The grace of you stopping in that storm, of choosing to care when you could have walked away. I want her to carry that with her." "Grace Elena," Calder repeated, testing the name. "Yeah, that's perfect." As the baby nursed and Mira drifted into exhausted sleep, Calder sat watching over them both, this family he'd somehow been blessed with. He thought about the man he'd been before that storm, isolated, resigned to a life of solitary work and emotional distance. That man felt like a stranger now. The years flowed past with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and children growing. Grace was joined by a brother, Thomas, named for Mira's father, 2 years later. Then another daughter, Anna, came along when Grace was 5. The cabin expanded with additions built onto the original structure. The small herd grew to a respectable size. The garden flourished under Mira's careful attention. They weren't rich by any measure. Money was often tight, especially in hard years when drought or disease affected the cattle. But they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Calder and Mira rode out to her father's grave. The children stayed with Mrs. Chen in town, giving their parents a rare day alone together. The headstone had weathered over the years, but Calder kept it maintained, the letters still clearly readable. "I wish he could have met the children," Mira said, placing fresh wildflowers on the grave. "He would have loved them so much." "They know about him," Calder said. "We make sure of that. Grace is already reading everything she can get her hands on, just like Thomas did. And Tommy asks constant questions about everything. That's the teacher in him coming through." "I tell them stories," Mira said, "about their grandfather who loved books and believed education could change the world. I want them to know where they come from, what was sacrificed so they could be here." She stood and took Calder's hand. "Papa, if you can hear me, I want you to know I'm happy. So incredibly happy. The life you wanted for me, the fresh start you were trying to give us, I found it. Not in Denver with Uncle Samuel, but here in Colorado, with this stubborn, wonderful man who stopped in a storm and changed everything. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. Thank you for teaching me to be strong enough to survive, to rebuild, to love again even after loss. I carry you with me every day. They stood in silence for a while, paying their respects. Then they mounted up and rode toward Cross Ridge, where Tom Breslin had invited them for dinner. The old ranch looked much as it had 10 years ago, though there were new faces among the hands and a few more gray hairs on Breslin himself. 10 years, Breslin marveled over dinner. Seems like just yesterday you two were dancing around your feelings for each other, too stubborn to admit what everyone else could see plain as day. We got there eventually, Calder said, his hand finding Mira's under the table. You did indeed, and built something real and lasting. Breslin raised his glass. To 10 years, and to many more to come. That night, lying in bed in their cabin with their children asleep in the next room, Mira traced idle patterns on Calder's chest. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? She asked. If that storm hadn't hit, or if you'd ridden past the wagon, or if any number of small things had gone differently? Sometimes, Calder admitted, but I try not to. No point in dwelling on paths not taken. I think about it, Mira said, about what my life would be if you'd kept riding. I'd probably be dead. Or if I'd somehow survived, I'd have gone to California, lived with my uncle, maybe found some measure of happiness eventually, but it wouldn't have been this. She looked around their room, at the life they'd built. It wouldn't have been us. No, Calder agreed. It wouldn't have. I used to think the West wasn't made for love, she said softly. That it was too hard, too unforgiving. That happiness was something you could only find in civilized places with easy living. And now? Now I know that's backwards. Love doesn't need easy circumstances. It just needs two people brave enough to try. She lifted her head to look at him. You made me brave, Calder. You and this life we've built together. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You were always brave. You just needed reminding. More years passed. Grace grew into a serious young woman who devoured books and helped her mother teach reading to younger children in the area. Thomas became his father's shadow, learning ranching and developing a natural gift for handling horses. Anna, the youngest, was wild and fearless, always coming home muddy and triumphant from some adventure. Calder's hair began to gray at the temples. Lines appeared at the corners of Mira's eyes, earned from years of squinting into the sun and smiling at her family. Their hands grew calloused and weathered, marked by honest work. Cross Ridge Ranch changed hands when Tom Breslin retired and moved to live with his sister in Denver. The new owner was a businessman from back east who knew nothing about cattle but had money to hire people who did. It wasn't the same, but Calder had his own land now, his own small operation. He didn't need to work for someone else anymore. On a summer evening when Calder was 45 and Mira 42, they sat on their porch watching their cattle graze in the distance while their grandchildren, Grace's twins, played in the yard. Their daughter had married a good man, a doctor who'd set up practice in Maple Creek, and the young family visited often. Remember when you proposed? Mira asked suddenly, up on that hill overlooking Cross Ridge? I remember being terrified you'd say no. I remember thinking you'd taken too long to ask. She smiled. Worth the wait, though. Calder looked at his wife, this woman who'd survived tragedy and transformed it into something beautiful, who'd built a life and a family in one of the harshest, most unforgiving places on earth, who still looked at him sometimes like he'd hung the moon, even though they both knew better. I used to think the West wasn't made for love, he said, echoing words she'd spoken years ago. And now? Now I know that's not quite right. He took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. The West doesn't care about love one way or the other. It's neutral, just land and sky and weather. But maybe that's exactly what makes it perfect for love. Because without all the social rules and expectations of civilized places, you get to choose. Every day you choose. And that choice means something real. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I choose you, she said softly. Today and every day. Same as always. Same as always, Calder agreed. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not threatening, just the promise of rain that the land desperately needed. A storm was coming, but they'd weathered so many by now. They knew how to face them together. And as the first drops began to fall and they called the grandchildren inside, as they gathered around the table for supper and the conversation flowed warm and easy, Calder Wynne felt something he'd never expected to feel that night in the storm when he'd found a broken young woman crying beside her dead father. He felt complete. He felt home. He felt like the luckiest man who'd ever lived. Because he'd stopped. Because he'd cared. Because he'd whispered, "You're safe now," to a stranger and meant it with everything in him. And that one choice, that one moment of compassion in the midst of a raging storm had given him everything that mattered, a wife he loved beyond measure, children who made him proud, a life full of purpose and meaning and the kind of deep satisfaction that came from building something real with your own two hands. The cowboy who'd once ridden alone had found his reason for staying, and he'd never looked back. Many years later, when Calder was old and his children grown with families of their own, someone would ask him what the secret was. How to build a life that lasted. How to find love in a place as harsh as the frontier. He'd think for a long moment, then say simply, "You stop when someone needs help. You keep your promises. And you remember that the hardest moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings if you're just brave enough to hold on." It was the truth he and Mira had lived by. The truth they'd passed down to their children and grandchildren. The truth written in every weathered board of their cabin, every fence post on their land, every photograph on their walls, showing a family that shouldn't have existed but did because a cowboy had made the choice to care. And when Calder finally passed, peacefully, in his sleep, with Mira beside him and his children gathered close, his last thought was of that storm, of finding her in the rain, of all the moments that had flowed from that one decision. He'd lived a good life, a full life, a life worth every hardship and every struggle. And it had all begun with a girl crying in the rain and a cowboy who couldn't bring himself to ride past. That, more than anything else, was the legacy he left behind. Not land or money or possessions, but the understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stop. Pay attention. Care when it would be easier not to. Because you never know when that moment of compassion might save not just one life, but create an entire world of love and family and hope that will ripple out long after you're gone. The storm had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together through all the storms that followed that had made the story worth telling. And it was a story their descendants would tell for generations, gathered around fires on cold nights, reminding each other that in the hardest places, in the darkest moments, love can still take root and grow into something magnificent. All it takes is someone brave enough to stop, to care, to whisper, "You're safe now," and mean it. Everything else follows from there.